Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I continue my experiments with the Derwent products. As you can see, I am inking in a piece and I have already inked this in, and you can see that in a previous video where I also explained at the front of the video how you can take your iPad and turn it into a Lightbox. At the end of that video, you're going to see some of the inking that I did for this project. So I will link that down below if you want to take a look at that before we start, so you can catch up with the project, and I'll have all the information there if you want to follow along and do this piece with me. So we are going to be experimenting with combining Derwent Inktense watercolor pencils. Yes, the US box does call them watercolor pencils. And we're going to be adding Derwent Graphitint. Now I have the Graphitint that's in the paint pan, so that's what I'm going to be using. My reference photo came from a website called Unsplash, and this is a royalty-free piece that you're allowed to use as long as you give credit to the photographer, which I have in the description down below. So you can check that out there. This video is going to be a little bit different in that I am going to go step by step like I always do, but I'm going to provide some shots of the piece, some still shots that you can freeze the screen and take a look at it if you are actually following along with me on this piece. So let's get started. I'm going to need just 1 cup of water for this. That's all I'm going to use because we're starting with the Inktense and not the Graphitint. And I have my Royal and Langnickel brushes from their Zen series. And you can see, oh, my daughter made this. I wanted to show you a little brush rest. She had some extra stuff. She said, Mom, I don't know how to make a brush rest. Bring your brushes and let me try this out. So she did. And so she said, I'm not finished with it. And I'm like, I'm using it anyway. Then we have the Derwent paint pocket, the Graphitint paint pocket set. And I'm going to put that to the side because, like I said, we're going to start with the Inktense pencils. And the basic thing we're going to do in this video is get all of our darks and all of our shadows in. I am going to keep these handy, and they do come in handy when I'm working on this, and that is where I have done the color swatching previously. I'm starting with the bark, and I have that nice and sharp. Notice how it's nice and sharp. And if you want to see those color swatchings, I'm going to link that down below for you as well. If you don't want to do a color swatching on your own at the end, I will have those color swatchings where they are like a freeze frame, and you can freeze it and take a screenshot and just use it straight from there. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my reference, which is over to the side on my iPad, and I'm looking for all of the dark areas. For shadows, you're not going to see me using black. I don't like to use black. I think more like an impressionist artist, and I like to use anything but black. I'll use browns, I'll use dark blues, I'll use purples, I'll even use reds, but a combination of those, but I will not use black for shadows. So I'm going through, this is sort of a stone-faced building, and it's an older building, so there are a lot of dark areas, a lot of stains, especially like under the windows. And I'm going through right now, and I'm just getting all of those shades in. I'm going kind of a medium pressure, not too hard, because these are, as the name implies, Inktense, and they can get intense if you put too much pressure on them. So I'm trying to be mindful of that. And instead of applying them to a surface at the sides so that I can dip into them like regular watercolors, I decided to use them just as pencils in this first part. Now I will use them the previous way, as I just mentioned, where I scribble to the side on something and then activate them to the side and bring them over as watercolor, but we'll do that in part 2. So yes, there is more than one part to this video because this was kind of a hard one for me. It required me sitting for a long period of time, and because I started with pencil and there's a lot of coloring to do, it took me a long time to sit there, and with arthritis and fibromyalgia, I couldn't sit for long periods of time. So, and I work slowly, so you're going to get to see this in 2. I think we'll just do this in 2 videos, but this one we're just going to be getting in all of the shading and all of the dark areas, on the building, and I'm going to let you watch me color, and I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to hop back on in a few minutes and tell you some more about what I'm doing. Something that's important to remember, whether you're using regular colored pencils or pencils for watercolor purpose, such as we're doing here, it's a good idea to have a sharpener handy. I've done a project in the past where I didn't sharpen the pencils at all, but I didn't have the tight areas like I have on this building. So it kind of depends on what your subject is that you're coloring, but it's a good idea to have a sharpener handy. So areas like where I'm coloring now and I need a really dark tight area, I can get in there with that sharp point, and it just keeps the whole piece kind of consistent, so that's a good thing. It's also a good idea, these will smear if you rub your hand across them. It's a good idea, I've already colored on the bottom, to make sure you have a piece of paper as I have there so that you don't smear that around. This part of the video where I'm coloring things in, and that's another reason it's taking more than one video to get this whole project in. I wanted to show almost every part of this particular stage of the piece, because if you are following along, I don't want you wondering where I've colored. I want you to be able to see a little bit more of the process in a greater detail. Something I failed to mention at the beginning of the video is that I am working on hot press paper. I worked on cold press the last time. If you watched me do this before, the last time you watched me work with Derwent Inktense, I worked on cold press paper, and of course cold press has a lot of texture. Hot press has texture as well, but not quite as much. And you can see how much it is helping me out in the bricks right above this, or I should say the blocks right above where I'm coloring down. The upper part of the building, sort of to the left of your screen, you can see there are horizontal lines going through those blocks. Those are not lines that I've drawn. That is simply from coloring over the surface of the paper. It created those wonderful textures in there for me, and that's going to help me out when I start to put water on this piece. I don't know if you caught that just then, but I was reaching off screen to grab the pencil sharpener to give this pencil another point. These pencils keep a point if you're not doing hard pressure on them and you're not doing a large, constant coloring area. They keep a point for a good long time, so that's a wonderful thing about these pencils. If you are following along with this piece, then we are about to come up on a 10-second freeze on the entire coloring that I did. So it's coming up right now. So if you want to freeze the screen, and now's the time to do that. I am going to try to use this smaller brush. Now, as you know, I love my size 8. If you've watched my other videos, I do almost everything with that size 8, but I do have some tiny areas in there. So I am going to utilize that smaller brush, and all I need is that, my brushes, just a towel to wipe my brushes off on, and the water. And that's why there's only one container of water, because I'm not switching colors right now. I only have this one color. So I'm activating it. If I have a little too much, I just dab my brush, get a little more water. You're going to see the upper part of the building is a bit darker than some of the other spots on the building. That's because there's a slight overhang creating a shadow. So I wanted to get all of that shadow in there. This is the darkest part of the shadow. I'm going to come back with that Graphitint and finish it off. And I can't wait till we get to that part because I think you're really going to like the Graphitint on top if you're doing this. So as you can see, that lasted a little while, and now I have switched back to my size 8. I just love a size 8. I love a bigger brush with a point. That's my favorite brush. So as you can see, this is pretty dark in here, and I don't want it quite that dark. And I also want to kind of spread that out just a little bit without using water in my brush. So if you're following along, grab a paper towel, because we're going to use that paper towel, there it is, to kind of dab those areas. And I'm not moving around the paper towel so that I don't have ink on it getting everywhere. I'm just letting that ink get everywhere. And the reason for that is it's going to give more texture and more believability to those stones on the front of the building. So it's going to put some of the ink that I haven't, and I'm calling it ink because they are ink tints, even though they're watercolors, that's how we're using them, they are ink tints. So it's going to move some of that Inktense watercolor around to other areas where we've not applied it, but it gives some more depth to those bricks. So that's the technique I'm going to be using through this whole piece. My reason for choosing the Inktense as my base shadows is that Inktense, once we put it on the paper, you can remove it while it's wet, you can lift it a little bit, but once it's dry, it's on there. So we can come back and layer on top of that, and we don't have any fear of that lifting off. So that's going to work wonderfully well. The only thing you have to be certain of is that you are completely activating all the color you put down. So what I did, and I did not get this filmed, I do apologize, when I completely finished all of this, I went ahead and took my size 8 brush and went back over the whole thing just with water to make sure I hadn't missed anything. So here's that freeze frame if you're following along. This is the part I have been really excited to show you. We have brought out the Graphitint pans, and I am using a graphite gray. So that's the color I'm working with there. I'm not working straight out of the pan. Instead, I'm using my mixing palette to the side, just putting some in there, trying to keep it kind of light. I don't want to apply it too heavily yet, and I am going right on top of the stuff I've already done, and look at that wonderful texture. It really brings out that dark underneath. It makes those blocks going across the top really pop, and it adds some more texture. And almost, and if you have seen my other Graphitint before, you know that it creates kind of a granulation when you mix those colors together. I'm not mixing Graphitint and Graphitint, I'm mixing Graphitint and Inktense, but it is still picking up on that, and I can see some granulation in there. I don't know how it works, but I am certainly glad that it does. When we started this piece with our Inktense, we were concerned more with creating shadow and getting some depth on all of the blocks on the front of the building. We're still concerned, and now that we've switched over to Graphitint, we're still concerned with getting those shadows in, but I'm also going to be using it to create color on the face of the building. So it's not just for shadow, it's also for color. Well, we are coming to the end of our video and coming up on that 10-second freeze frame of where we are on this stage. I appreciate your being here. If you enjoyed me experimenting with the Derwent and you have some suggestions of products you would like for me to possibly experiment with in the future, please put those down in the comments below. As always, thanks so much, and I will see you in the next one.